Hi, I'm Kezia. I'm a stroke survivor and a member of Bind.
And hi, I'm Carrie, a stroke survivor and a member of Bind as well. And today we are welcoming Leigh Richardson, who is the founder and clinical director for the Brain Performance Center and has studied human behavior for over 30 years. She is also the host of her own podcast, In the Head with Leigh Richardson, and just happens to also be a TBI survivor. So, Leigh, welcome today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess just to get started, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I have a different understanding of brain injury than someone maybe on the street does. When I have twin boys that are turning 35 this month, and when they were in the second grade, one got hit by a car, the other one watched, and of course we went to the emergency room. He didn't lose consciousness. We went to the emergency room and they said he's had a concussion, but he's fine. If this doesn't happen and this doesn't happen, he's fine. So we thought he was fine until he got to fifth grade. When he got to fifth grade, he came to me and he said, "Mom, you have to help me. My brain is broke." And my response was, "Oh, honey, fifth grade's a hard year." And he said, "Mom, you're not listening to me." And he was right. So I said, "Okay, sit down." And we talked, and the more I listened to him, I realized he thinks he's got this figured out. So I said, "Well, what do you think's going on?" And he said, "Well, I've been on the internet, and I am sure I have ADHD." At that point in time, I had never heard of ADHD. My first life was in human resources. I was running my own human resource consulting business. So I said, "I got this. I'll go to the school." I go to the school, I talk to the counselor. My son thinks he has ADHD. And she said, "No, your son does not have ADHD. He's never failed anything. He's never been a behavior problem. Your kid's lazy." I said, "Okay, my son wants help. What can I do to help him?" And she said, "Put him on Ritalin." And my response was, "Well, you just told me there's nothing wrong with my kid, so why would I give my kid speed?" And the answer was, "That's all you can do." And that's when I really started my journey to figure out what I could do to help him. I found a neurologist, Dr. Walker, and he was doing neurofeedback. And, back then it was old school neurofeedback. This was like in 2003, and it took a lot more sessions. But, once I started to see my son's confidence improve, I thought, well, maybe this can help me. I've been in ICU twice with brain injury. And at this point in time, I had only had one brain injury, and I had lost my sense of smell. And when I came out of the hospital, out of ICU, the neurologist said, "There's nothing you can do about it. Your sense of smell is gone." And at that point in time, those twins were 2 years old. I had to see, I had to hear. So I'm like, okay, well, losing your sense of smell is a lot more complicated than that. There's more emotional memories tied with smell. Smell is a much bigger sense than I appreciated at the time. So I'm there twice a week, and I said, well, maybe I should try this. Do you think I could get my sense of smell back? And Dr. Walker's like, I don't know. I said, well, I'm going to try it. So we did the brain map, and looking at the brain map when we're going over it, he said, well, how's your visual processing, which is done in the very back of your head? I said, oh, it's great. I love People magazine. I read it all the time. And he said, well, okay, do you read anything else? And I said, well, I really haven't read since I had my kids, because I had just finished an MBA program. I had just finished a leadership development program. I had my kids, twins. Who has time to read?
Right.
So he's like, okay. So I did the brain training, and I got my sense of smell back, which was amazing. But what I noticed right away was I started reading books. I hadn't read books in years, and that was my visual processing. So that was a game changer for me. I figured out what I was going to do. I figured out I'd go to UNT and do my didactic training. My undergrad was sufficient to get me started, and do an internship with him, and then get board certified, which I did in 2005. And I ended up working for him until 2005, from 2005 until 2009. Oh, wow. Great guy, love him, still good friends. But I wanted to do other things. I wanted to bring other things in. I wanted to bring, at that point in time, like, these people got to talk about it. I need to get certified as a coach. Okay, so I did. And then I wanted to do biofeedback, and there was so much I wanted to do, and he would laugh, and he would say, well, when you start your own practice, you can do all of that. I don't think he ever thought I would.
Right.
But in 2009, I was in grad school for counseling. I had realized that the coaching wasn't going to be sufficient. So I was in grad school for counseling, had completed all my coursework. All I had to do was take the National Counseling Licensing Exam. One Saturday night, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the restroom, and I slipped on my robe that I had left on the floor and hit my head on the floor. And immediately my husband says, we're going to the emergency room. I said, I am not going to the emergency room on a Saturday night. It's wild and crazy. He said, will you go in the morning? I said, yes. So we get up and we go. We get there and they do a CAT scan and stuff, and they look at me and say, well, you can't stay here. And I was like, see, told you I didn't need to be here. And they said, oh no, you need to be at a hospital where there's a neurosurgeon. You have a brain bleed,
oh, wow.
and at any point you may need surgery. So I did, and of course I got through that. But when I came out of that, my memory was next to nothing. All I had to do was take the National Counseling Licensing Exam, and I couldn't remember hardly anything. So did some research and figured out, well, I need to learn whole brain training. Right. And Dr. Walker did not want to learn whole brain training, so I learned it myself. And
in the midst of a brain injury.
In the midst of a brain
Wow.
injury, and got my sense of memory back. And then in 2009, I started my own practice. And I had a neurologist as a medical director and followed down that path. He and I had such big dreams, Dr. Roroki. We were going to form TIMRI, Texas Integrated Medical Research Institute. He lived in the insurance world and I lived in the cash world. And he thought that he could push, people would want to come over and do it, and they didn't. And in 2011, I said, he love you, still love him, but I'm changing my model. I'm changing to a behavioral model, or behavioral health model. And so it's really evolved. But when I've seen what brain injury can do, and one of the first ladies that joined me was a lady that I had worked with her son back in 2007 at Dr. Walker's. When he was 16 years old, they thought he had a sinus infection and he had encephalopathy. He went into the hospital. He went into a coma. He was in a coma for over 6 months. Everyone told her that she needed to let go, and she refused to. He had to learn to crawl again, walk again, chew again, swallow again, and he did. And when he got to the point in 2007 where he was ready to work on his brain, they came, and I was the primary person that worked with him on his neurotherapy, and we made great progress. Yeah. And off he goes to Austin. In 2009, when I had started my own practice, my phone rings, and this hysterical woman, Miss Leigh, you have to help me. And I'm like, okay, I'll help you, but who is this?
Yeah.
And she said, it's Sally Coquin. I'm like, oh my gosh, Sally. So she brought her son over. We got him back where he needed to be. And she had learned so much, as I'm sure both of you ladies and everyone that's a member of BIND knows. You learn so much in your healing process. And I said, you have got to share your knowledge. So she joined me, and she got board certified, and she's been my primary partner in crime ever since then.
Oh, wow.
So I've learned from her. I continue to learn from clients that come in that have had brain injury. And what I think the hardest thing for me to accept is that things just quit working.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It just quit working. Yeah. And, we all want to fix it. I can fix this. And the good news is you can fix it, right, but you can't do it on your own. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that was hardest for me. But I so wanted to get that license as a professional counselor. I started researching, what am I going to do? How am I going to get my memory back? First thing you see on the internet is supplements.
Right.
So after trying like 4 different supplements, and I'm like, well, I don't even remember what supplement I took today. That wasn't working.
Right.
And so it made me get more adventuresome and try to figure out what would.
Right.
Yeah. I think your story is extremely like inspiring because it started off with your kids, your twins, and then it went off to with you. So I think that was really interesting that it did that. And also like how you got affected and like what a brain injury ended up doing to you and how you went off to being so empowering here within the brain injury community. That's really cool. So with your kids, like how did that become so inspiring to look on yourself? Because they were kids and it was a car accident, and then for you to look into how did that happen? Like, did you just feel like your kids and how they were affected, and was that similar to how you were affected?
Well, it was pretty different because in both cases I did lose consciousness, and he did not. But when it's your child, and when you don't have, and there's nothing wrong with medication for a lot of people. Personally, medication doesn't work for me. You give me an antibiotic and I get a red rash on my face. So it's not, and never has been, my first line of treatment. My kids have taken plenty of medication, as have I, but not the very first thing that I could do. And that's what really inspired me, is that there's got to be something else out there besides synthetic chemicals.
Right. So technically, both the times that you had a brain injury, they would both be considered concussions?
Yes, they would
okay.
be. And in both times I lost consciousness, and which you have a little bit different recovery from. And I think being in 5th grade or in 2nd grade when the accident happened, you really don't have the cognitive capabilities to realize. I mean, all he knew was that hurt. I want to go home. I want to see the dog. He processed the information very, very differently. And it was amazing to me that I had never really reflected on my visual processing because I read People magazine. And, it's written at a 1st grade level.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I still read People magazine.
Right.
But it just, when you have young kids, the amount of reading that you do really does change. And what you read. I mean, good night.
Right. You're still reading at a 1st grade, 2nd grade level.
And I enjoyed it, so it never really occurred on me until when they were in kindergarten, I got a call from the very first guy that had hired me with Exxon in my human resource world and brought me back. And so I even noticed then, time goes by. The brain has a philosophy, use it or lose it. You're not using those neural pathways, they're shutting down. But without that was my philosophy. It said, I just haven't used them in a while, and they've shut down.
Just getting old. Yeah. I'm going to take a quick break and remind our listeners to go ahead and click that like button and continue to keep on liking and clicking when you can. And I want to go back because I'm thinking about this. Your experience with brain injury. You've got all kinds of experience, but just your personal experience. So you had a trip and a fall, lost consciousness, lost sense of smell, kind of thought didn't think anything about your reading till later. Then your son has one, and his effects didn't really start to show until his brain finally started maturing. Then you had another fall and actually ended up with a brain bleed. And did you have any residual effects from that one? I mean, you've seen 3 different types personally. As I'm sure you're aware, as we're aware, as we try to tell all our listeners, just because you've met a brain injury doesn't mean you understand brain injury. Every single brain injury person is totally different than the person you talked to 5 minutes ago.
Absolutely. And one of the things I noticed when I came out of the hospital from when I'd lost my sense of smell was just nausea. Just so much in my stomach all the time. And eventually that calmed down. But of course, then instead of just realizing, number one, I was anxious as a result. Right. And I believe the nausea came from the anxiety, but I didn't realize it. And I think that as that brain starts to calm down, then you feel like that you're okay, I can figure that out. That increases your confidence. Your confidence goes up, your self-esteem goes up, your curiosity goes up. You want to learn more, you want to try different things. And that's what I encourage people that have had a brain injury to do, is don't quit trying, but take your time.
Yes.
And show yourself some grace and be kind to yourself, because it takes time. And maybe after I got out of ICU the first time, it took me probably a couple of months to stabilize. Then when I went back in ICU, when I came out the next time, by the way, I did lose some of my sense of smell after that second concussion.
Okay.
And that's normal. But the recovery from a second concussion is much different from the first. And while I didn't really realize it, because other than that, I was good. But when you think about Thanksgiving, I think about last year's Thanksgiving. I can't tell you who sat where. I can't tell you what they were wearing. I can tell you is the food, what I smelled when I walked in the house.
Right.
I can tell you who brought the sweet potatoes, who brought the pie. I mean, those are things, and that's all. That's memory from your sense of smell.
Right. And I think that you also just mentioned your great advice for someone, give yourself some grace, some patience. All of that is so great. And I think as someone that had a brain injury, that's a great tip. But you were also a caregiver as well. Do you have a tip for caregivers also to take into consideration and really remember when their family or their neighbor, whoever is really close to their heart, for them to also be taking care of them?
Well, that's a very good point. My mom suffered a stroke, and she came to be much more involved in my life at that point. And I started using my power of observation to a much higher extent, and just paying attention. Is it taking her a little longer today? Does she seem a little bit disheveled today? Does she not know where her keys are today? And not that when I saw those things that I would point them out to her, but just note so that I could adapt my skill and my time to be able to donate what she needs.
Yeah, and thank you so much for that. I think that you were able to give those two different perspectives, being a caregiver for your mother and your kids, and also being a brain injury survivor. So I really want to thank you for that, to be able to do that and share all of your experience, which is very different than we've heard from other different guests.
No,
so
it is.
So
but I also want to say, I think even just relating adult brain injury survivors back to how you said you talked to your son, I mean, he knew something was wrong with his brain. He didn't know what it was, but he knew something wasn't right, if something was wrong. And I think everyone needs to know that, adult, child, whatever, if you feel like something's wrong with your brain, well, maybe,
probably is.
Go ahead, go get it checked. I mean, would you agree?
I totally agree with that. And, the body keeps score of everything that's going on in your brain. So if you start having all these, like I had started having the nausea and the different muscle tension, or you get dizzy, or you sweat more, whatever is going on in your body relates to what's going on in your brain.
Sure.
So pay attention to that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for coming on to us. I do want to inform all of our listeners that this isn't the only thing you're going to hear from Leigh. So I do want to thank you so much for joining us and coming on to this episode. It's been so much great information. And I also want to thank all our followers to keep on listening and check us out on Thursday.
And remember, if you'd like to contact us, you can contact us at bindwaves@thebind.org. You can email us there. You can find us on our website, thebind.org/bindwaves. And follow us on Instagram. And you can also, we'll have Leigh's contact information in the show notes, so in the description, so that if you want to learn more about her story and her experience with the Brain Performance Center, which we're going to get into that some more depth later, we'll have all that information available as well.
Yep, and like I said, every Thursday we are going to be up with a new episode, so don't forget, and we are on all of your favorite platforms. So until next time.
Until next time.